Well, thanks so much for having me. I should say this is a pretty new project. I've only been working on this since around New Year's, but it's becoming one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. This is the first time I've presented it, and this is kind of a perfect audience for it because the talk is pretty technical and everything's really in the details. So I'm really going to sort of try to present the full system. And I think that said, I think I still have too many slides and it's a bit late for us over here. So I think rather than trying to sort of force my way through the entire talk at a fast clip, I'm just going to sort of take my time, and it might mean that the stuff on quantifiers at the end, I might have to sort of rush through that. But I'm sort of happy to stick around as long as people want to talk about the stuff after maybe the talk officially ends, because I really just love thinking about this stuff recently. And so, yeah, if we don't cover everything and people want to see more of the details, I'm happy to do that later. Okay, so wait, so give me a second. This was working fine before. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So the aim of the project is to develop a compositional generalization of truthmaker semantics. So I think truthmaker semantics is really an umbrella term. There's a few different lines of work that sort of fall under this. I'm going to be trying to generalize what's sometimes called recursive truthmaker semantics, which originated in work by Bosma and Fraassen in this really nice paper on tautological entailment, actually, in the late 1960s. So this work sort of grew out of relevance logic. This is also being developed, well, I mean, mostly by Kit Fine in recent work, and also some linguists like Frederica Moltmann. It also appears in like Steve Yablo's book Aboutness, although he sort of introduces both these recursive truthmakers, the stuff I'm going to talk about today, and also what he calls reductive truthmakers. And reductive truthmakers aren't going to make much of an appearance here today. Okay, so I should say, while the project is really builds on work mainly by philosophers, there's going to be sort of more of a linguistics talk. And the motivation for the talk was that there's these really striking parallels between the truthmaker semantic treatment of conjunction and disjunction and related proposals about NP coordination, noun phrase coordination, in the linguistics literature. And it's really this that got me started on this work. And so in particular, since this early work by Link on plurals, this is in linguistics, a lot of linguists have proposed that conjunctions like Alfonso and Clarabel denote the sum of Alfonso and Clarabel. And similarly in truthmaker semantics, the set of truthmakers, so let's say the positive proposition expressed by conjunction like Alfonso sang and Clarabel danced, is going to consist of the truthmakers obtained by fusing a truthmaker for the left conjunct with a truthmaker for the right conjunct. Okay, so this fusion and conjunction, both at the NP level, that's being proposed by linguists, and at the sentential level, that's what's being proposed in sort of standard systems of recursive truthmaker semantics. Okay, and then similarly, a popular proposal in the linguistics literature is that disjunction generates alternatives. Okay, so an NP disjunction like Alfonso or Clarabel would denote the set containing Alfonso and Clarabel. Okay, so one proponent of this is Alonso Oval's dissertation, where he develops a Hamlin-style alternative semantics. Okay, but there's also related work by Kratzer and Shimayama, Simon Chowler and others on indefinites and indeterminate pronouns, which makes similar proposals. Okay, and then there's sort of a parallel to this in sentential truthmaker semantics, where a sentential disjunction like Alfonso sang or Clarabel danced is going to be the truthmakers for that disjunction are going to be the truthmakers for each of the conjuncts unions together. Okay. Okay, truthmaker semantics also offers a pretty interesting treatment of negation as an operator for talking between verifiers and falsifiers of a negated sentence. I'm thinking here of the standard system of truthmaker semantics. Okay, there are systems which don't do this. Okay, and this is sort of a new part of the talk. At least I haven't seen this formalized anywhere and worked out precisely, but I'm going to argue that roughly the same kind of bicameral or bilateral approach can be applied to quantification or non-quantificational determiner phrases as well. So noun phrases and quantifiers, okay, which are going to be assigned both denotations and anti-denotations. And here's where it gets a bit weird. From an entity space containing both positive and negative individuals, okay? I'm going to sort of spend some time motivating this, so don't run for the hills just yet, okay? And I should say, after sort of working on this project for a few weeks, I realized that Kit actually anticipates the kind of decentralized theory that I'm going to be developing today in a section of one of his many survey papers on this. It's this paper, A Theory of Truthmaker Content 1 from 2017. And it's a real gem, just this one section in the paper, which really anticipates a lot of stuff that's going to happen today. Okay, so just full disclosure, so this project really started with a very experimental spirit. I just kind of wanted to see whether I could even get this to work. But actually, the longer I've been working on this, the more I've really come to think that this offers a very attractive unified theory of negation, conjunction, disjunction, and quantification in a pluralized partial setting. And it's a real fresh take on familiar concepts. So as logicians, I mean, we've spent, you know, most of our lives thinking about these connectives and quantifiers. But the way that this is going to be implemented today, it might be sort of new to you. I mean, especially if you're not familiar with some of the linguistics literature on this, on like plurals and mereology. It's sort of a different way of sort of implementing some very sort of basic ideas. And so even if you don't come away from this talk thinking that compositional truthmaker semantics is the way to go, you might still see sort of a refreshing take on things that you've been thinking about for a long time. And so I hope you still get something interesting from this talk. Okay, I should say, one of the reasons why I've become so attracted to the theory is that it just has there's some really nice features of it that were really surprising to me actually as they sort of fell into place. So among other things, you get a really nice treatment of cumulative readings. I'll clarify what that is in a moment, which are really difficult to make sense of, especially the conditions under which they're false. So like sort of the negative side of cumulative readings, and you just get this really clean account. You get a nice treatment of homogeneity effects. I'll talk more about what those are in a moment. But then I think the real pot of gold today is going to come right at the end, where after having the system in place, I'm going to argue that you get a very nice treatment of sort of non-upward entailing quantifiers and coordinated determiner phrases that have been taken to be extremely problematic for a collective treatment of conjunction as fusion, right? So this idea that that conjoined NPs or DPs denote fusions. There's been these examples which people have thought that that's really a non-starter once you start considering certain quantified expressions. And you actually just get really simple treatments of them in the system. So I'm gonna say, I think that's kind of like the main, while I'm not gonna motivate each piece of the theory as we go, sort of very nice things are gonna fall out of it. And then we're gonna end on this like really dramatic note where we're gonna show that these things which have been very puzzling to linguists, you just get a very clean treatment of them. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of background, and I'm going to assume that people aren't super familiar with the stuff. So just a little bit on truthmaker semantics, just the sentential, the classic, well, standard version anyways, and then we'll move on to the new stuff. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of posets in this talk. I'll just crash through some basic definitions. So a poset is a set with a partial ordering on it. A poset's complete if every subset has a least upper bound. This includes the empty subset. Okay, sort of a nice feature of a complete poset is that it has a unique top element. Okay, so this is going to be the fusion of all the elements in the set. And so every element is going to be a part of that. And it's also going to have a unique bottom element, which is the fusion of the empty set. And that's going to be a part of every element in the poset. Okay, so it's bounded both from above and below. Okay, I'm going to be working both with non-atomistic and atomistic posets. So I need to tell you what atoms are and stuff like that. So an atom in a complete poset is going to be a minimal element in the sense that there's no element between it and bottom. Okay, I'm going to say that S is an atomic part of T if S is part of T and S is an atom. Okay, and I'm going to introduce this notation at S. This is just going to be the set of atomic parts of S. Okay, a complete poset is going to be atomistic if every element in the set is the fusion of its atomic parts. Okay, it can be like, so every element can be built up by fusing its atoms. Okay, and then you can define the Cartesian products of posets in the usual way. I'm going to skip these if you don't mind. Okay, so here's Fine's Truthmaker semantics in a nutshell in like 2 slides. Okay, so Fine implements Truthmaker semantics using complete posets. These needn't be atomistic for him. Okay, and so he calls these state spaces. So a state space is going to be a complete poset where S is a set of states, and then the partial ordering is a parthood relation. Okay, in Fine's work, he also introduces this upgraded notion of a modalized state space. This is just going to be a state space with an extra component, a downward closed set of states. Okay, that's going to be like the set of possible states. And then once you have that, you can define, you have both like mereological and modal structure to work with, and you can define a lot of nice concepts. In particular, you can define the notion of a world state. So you can have sort of possible, if you like working with possible worlds, you can do that. But actually, interestingly, I actually don't need any modality in the system. This is, I think, one of the really amazing things interesting things about Truthmaker semantics is that you can give a treatment of the Boolean connectives and quantifiers without even mentioning modality at all. Okay, so we don't need that structure here. Okay, so here's the actual semantics. So consider a basic sentential language. You have a set of atoms, a set of well-formed sentences. And this is going to be a semantics of exact, is sometimes called an exact semantics because it's going to assign exact verifiers and falsifiers to sentences. Okay, so a model for this language is going to be a state space combined with a valuation function, which is going to assign truth makers and false makers to all the atomic sentences. Okay, so every atomic sentence gets set to an ordered pair of sets of states, okay, where the first component is the set of exact truth makers or verifiers, and the second component is the set of exact false makers or falsifiers. Okay. If you had a modalized state space, you can impose various nice conditions. Like if you don't want truth value gluts, you can require that no truth maker and no false maker for an atomic sentence are compatible. If you don't like gaps, you can require that every possible state is compatible with either a truth maker or false maker for each atomic sentence, stuff like that. I don't need any of that stuff here, but you could do it if you like. Okay, so here's the actual recursive semantics. This is due to von Fraassen. Okay, and each sentence is going to be assigned a bicameral proposition. So it's a proposition which is going to have 2 parts, a positive and a negative part. Okay, where the positive part is going to be the truth makers for the sentence, and the negative part is going to be the false makers. This is really it. This is Truthmaker semantics in 4 lines. Okay, so a proposition expressed by a atomic sentence, this is this first line, is going to be just given to you by the model, right? So it's going to be the set of truth makers assigned by the model, and then the second component is going to be the set of false makers. Okay, negation sort of toggles between truth makers and false makers. So what this tells you is that the truth makers for a negated sentence are going to be the false makers for the embedded sentence, and the false makers for the negated sentence are going to be the truth makers for the embedded sentence. Okay. Conjunction, this first part is doing what I had on the first slide. So the truth makers for a conjunction are going to be the sort of pairwise fusions of truth makers of the conjuncts, and the false makers are going to be the union of the false makers for the left conjunct and the false makers for the right conjunct. And then disjunction does sort of the similar thing that you would expect. Okay, so that is Truthmaker semantics. That's it. So this is that's the standard theory of sentential Truthmaker semantics. There's a lot more to say about it. It's been applied in the study of a wide variety of phenomena like partial content. Linguists have used it to study modals, attitude verbs. It's been used in the philosophy of science to study confirmation and verisimilitude. It's you can define one thing I'm not going to talk about today. You can define a number of interesting consequence relations over the semantics and a notion of well, partial content, which I think is one of the most interesting features of the theory. Okay, just so you know, there's a lot of work that's been done based on just this core semantic framework. Okay, so now I want to sort of like start thinking about how to generalize this and desententialize it. Okay, as I mentioned, there's this section of this paper by Fine, the Theory of Truthmaker Content 1, section 4, where he really sort of anticipates a lot of the stuff I'm going to be saying. It's all informal and it's pretty underdeveloped, but he makes a number of, I think, really important insights that at least have really helped my own thinking. So I'm gonna sort of start by talking a little bit about those. So among these is just the general idea that you can think about a Boolean compound of arbitrary type as expressing a menu. I just think this has just been such a helpful way to think about things. Okay, so how does this work in Truthmaker semantics? Right, so you can think about one of these bilateral propositions that we just gave our recursive semantics for as really giving you a pair of menus. Right, so the truthmakers are like a menu of ways for a sentence to be made true, whereas the false makers, the second component of a proposition, the negative part, is a menu of ways for it to be made false. Okay, so here's an example. I'll just run through this quickly. So imagine you have just 3 atomic sentences. Each of them only has one truth maker, one false maker. Okay, now consider the sentence A or B and not C. Okay, the positive interpretation is going to deliver these 2 states. I'm not going to work out the details. Okay, but I don't know, homework exercise. And these are sort of a menu of, they're sort of the options for truth making. So one way for the sentence to be true would be for the state of A obtaining fused with C not obtaining. Okay, and then the other way would be for the state of B fused with the state of C not obtaining, or the false maker for C, for that to obtain. Okay, and then on the negative side, you get 2 options for false making. Okay, that just fall out of the semantics. Just side note, I can't resist saying this. So Fine in the paper, he compares this with like a food menu, right? So you can imagine like a menu which says like what you can have for breakfast, you can have like bacon and eggs, you can have granola. And stuff like that, that's like on the menu. And it's actually not a great analogy because like not eating, the thought is supposed to be like this is a menu for achieving gustatory pleasure or something like that. But like not eating something isn't a way to, get that. I think the better analogy is actually with a kind of like activity menu. So imagine like you're choosing how to plan your day. And like one option would be like go to the mountains. Okay, that would be really great. But also like things that are undesirable if the off menu can lead to like you having a good day, like not having to do your laundry or something, or not having to clean the house. Okay, so anyways, there's sort of, anyways, that's just a side comment. Okay, here's the more interesting stuff. Okay, so this is, I think, like, we're sort of now desententializing the theory. So at the NP level, Fine also proposes that, so I'm just seeing there's a comment in chat. Oh, Dave's.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay. So, Fine suggests that the TMS clauses that I introduced a few slides ago, they can be repurposed to determine which entities nominal expressions denote or preclude, where preclusion or anti-denotation is supposed to function like falsification in giving you the denotations of negative NP expressions. Okay, so here are some of like the clauses. Again, these are kind of like just the standard, the same Truthmaker clauses repurposed. So not A denotes the individual A if A precludes that individual, and not A precludes the individual A if A denotes it. So negation flips between preclusion and denotation. The clause for conjunction would be something like A and B denotes the individual C if C is a fusion of individuals A and B respectively denoted by. So the notation here is really bad to talk about. Okay, but hopefully you get the idea. So what is going on with this preclusion? Well, Fine actually suggests bringing in negative individuals to play a role analogous to false makers in the theory. Okay, and then once you have that, you can sort of analyze an NP compound like Alfonso or Berta and not Clarabelle in much the same way as we analyzed the sentential expression before. So you can take this to express a pair of menus, but now the positive menu lays out the entities denoted by this NP compound, and the negative menu lays out the entities it precludes. Okay, notice by the way, this just is the exact same result as in the sentential case. It's just instead of having sentences, you have NPs, you have names. So, so I think this account of NP coordination negation has considerable prima facie appeal, at least if you're already attracted to the sentential version of Truthmaker semantics. And but it does raise a number of puzzles. So the first one is Ricardo's question. So how exactly should we understand these negative individuals denoted by these negative nominal expressions? So Fine says a little bit about them, but even what he says casts them as these really mysterious creatures of darkness. So he says, a a negative individual is present in a scenario whenever the corresponding positive individual is absent. So there's like Socrates, and then there's like not Socrates, and not Socrates is around just in case Socrates isn't, and vice versa. Okay, so it's like shadow Socrates. Okay, here's another puzzle you might have. So whether a preclusion is understood in terms of the denotation of negative individuals or in some other way. So you might think, how does it interact with predication in a broader semantic theory? And this is really the puzzle of compositionality, like how does everything compose together? And this is really my primary concern in this talk and in this project. And then another question you might have is, can a menu semantics, the kind of stuff we've been developing, can it be extended to a full theory of generalized quantifiers, right? I mean, if we can only deal with just like names and verbs, that's all fine and well, but can we get anything like a real rich full linguistic theory out of this? Okay, and I'm gonna actually answer, the answer is really yes. And Fine actually already anticipates some of the quantifier stuff. And I think that's really where the theory is golden. It's like a really cool theory of generalized quantifiers. Okay, let me, before I actually get into the system, just one more introductory slide on these negative individuals. So I should say, I was really reluctant to work with negative individuals for a very long time. I tried, well, at least I haven't been working on this for very long, but to the extent that I have been, I really didn't want to bring them in, and I experimented with a variety of other options. But I really since learned to stop worrying and embrace both negative individuals in my entity domains and negative states in my domain of states. So I just want to say a little bit about why I'm no longer worried about these things and how I think about them to maybe soften this part of the theory. So the first thing I want to say about these is I really think that the decision about whether to introduce negative individuals, say, or even fusions of positive individuals for that matter, like what's a fusion? I take that to be a matter of natural language metaphysics, natural language ontology, without any real ontological commitment. And actually here I'm sort of echoing other similar sentiments by, for example, Bosman Fraassen makes some interest, he sort of, should I work with conjunctive facts or disjunctive facts in this 1969 paper? And he actually says it doesn't really matter. And he says these very anti-realist things in that paper as well. So, so I just want to say that. That said, I don't think that the decision to bring in negative individuals and states is purely technical. So I do assume in the background of this theory that language users represent individuals and states dichotomously as positively and negatively marked. Okay, and I think as a first approximation, you can maybe think about this as like, well, speakers are representing states themselves as occurring and non-occurring. So they represent occurrences and non-occurrences. And they represent individuals as participants or non-participants in states. So as being present or absent in a state. I think this is kind of like how Kit was thinking about it. But I actually think like you don't really have to think about it that way. And I actually think that in some cases, it's maybe not great to think about it this way. Like think about negative individuals as like absences. And okay, so and I've sort of come to think that the nature of this dichotomous system of representation, it ultimately like is revealed by the function it plays in the semantic theory itself, rather than standing in need of some independent characterization or definition. Okay, that said, let me just, one final thing. If you really, really don't like negative individuals, you really are just repulsed by this idea, I should say that I think pretty much everything I'm doing can be reformulated with just positive individuals and positive states. So if you don't like working with like not Socrates, right, you can just have a domain with Socrates, but then allow your semantics to operate on tuples with like Socrates 1 and Socrates 0, so like these polarized tuples. And in fact, I've sort of set up my model theory to give you a real sense of like how easy it is to do this. So I think that there's little harm in reifying negative individuals. I think it makes the semantics a lot cleaner. I actually think like our metaphysical hangups have been like a real hindrance to like progress, I've come to think, in semantics in various ways. This is a bold claim, but I'm gonna stand by it in this talk. And, but I think that you could reformulate this system in other ways if you don't like these things. Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna get through all of this, but I'll try. We'll get through as much as we can. Okay, so here is the system itself. So I'm gonna use a relational type logic. This is kind of unusual these days in linguistics. Most people are working in TY2 or some other functional type logic. This is building on Muskin's TT2 in this really nice book from the 90s, Meaning and Partiality, which came out of his dissertation. My extension of this is going to be called PTT2. The P is for pluralized and polarized version of the theory. And working with the relational approach, I just think is a lot, it really allows for a much cleaner, more streamlined semantic theory, as I'll try to show you, even though it's a little bit less familiar. Okay, so my types are going to be just basic types of entity and states. Okay, I'm also going to have product types. Okay, and I'm going to have a set or relational types as well. Okay, and nothing else as a type. Okay, here's the most complicated part of the background. I think these are going to be the frames in PTT2. I think there's a lot of ways that you can do this. This is the way that I think is both, this is the most elegant way of being able to think about how to do this. And it also, I think, makes the point of how the negative individuals are kind of optional. Like, I think you can sort of start to see it in the way I've set things up. Okay, so here's how the frames are going to work. There's these ground floor entity and state structures. Okay, these are going to be the things that get things going. So there's going to be an entity base, which is just an atomistic complete poset. Okay, and the state base, which is going to be a complete poset. This is like Fine's state space. Okay, but now I'm going to polarize. Okay, so and I think the simplest way to do it, or at least the best way I've thought to do this, is to just let your actual entity space be the Cartesian product of the entity base with itself. Okay, and then it's kind of just got all the features you want. So it's also atomistic and complete. It's got a null entity and a full entity. These are going to be these bottom elements and top elements. Okay, and now you can just think about the positive entities as all the pairs in this entity space where the second component is the null entity. Okay, and this just gives you all the positive entities. And the atomic ones here are going to be the set IN plus. That's the set of atomic individuals. Okay, and the negative entities can just be identified with all these pairs in your entity space, right? This product space where the first component is the null entity. So this just gives you everything you want. And then, so that gives you the negative entities. And again, you can, I'm going to have the special notation for talking about the set of atomic anti-individuals. Okay, and then everything else, so every other component of this product space where neither component is the null entity, this is going to be like a hybrid or mixed polarity entity, which is going to be a fusion of both positive and negative individuals. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then similarly for the state space, I can just take that to be the product space, just that state base, the product of it with itself. Okay, it's also going to be a complete poset. It's going to have a null state and a full state. And just as before, we can have the positive states are living inside of it. They're just the tuples where the second element is the empty state, the null state, and the negative states are the ones where the first component is the null state. Everything else is a hybrid or mixed polarity state. Okay, and then the higher level products and relational spaces, there's nothing surprising here. So the domain of a product type is just going to be a set of ordered pairs, right? And then the domain of relational type SA is just going to be the power set of the domain of the corresponding to type A. Okay. Okay, so within this, you can define this notion of orthogonality. Okay, so we're going to say this applies both either to entities or states. So we're going to say that in entities or states, X and Y are orthogonal. Okay, if one is obtained, like remember, all of these are really just ordered pairs, right? So you just flip the ordered pairs, right? And that flips between positive and negative ones. Okay, I'm going to sometimes use this notation. The orthogonal counterpart, X, and then this bottom superscript of X is going to be the unique Y, which is its, to which it's orthogonal. Okay, so say there's sort of some interesting antecedents to this, and like Goldblatt's ortho frames from the 70s, and then Dunn actually introduces something called perp in some of his work in relevance logic, and then Fine also has this similar thing. Sorry, I can't remember what he calls it off the top of my head, but anyways, this idea, there's something like this in a lot of previous systems. You can think about, you don't really need to have truth values as a separate type because they can be sort of defined within the system, although they don't really play much of a role in what follows. Okay, just some other sort of quick points. So the null entity is both positive and negative. So too is the null state. Okay, here's just sort of an interesting thing. So note that none of the higher level spaces are endowed with their own mereological structure. So only the entity and state spaces actually have parthood defined on top of them. So this is unlike some really influential recent work in linguistics by Yablo where you have pluralities in every single semantic domain. I don't have that. That said, you can easily define, extend the definition of fusion to work its way through all the PTT2 types. Okay, and it's the way you would expect. So for entities and states, by the Ricardo, this is like that circle plus thing. Yeah, so it's really going to be, this is really going to be fusion going forward. Okay, so it really corresponds to the just the fusion given in the model theory for entities and states. And then for tuples, the fusion of a bunch of tuples is just going to be a new tuple obtained by fusing together the first coordinate, fusing together the second coordinate, and so on. And then the fusion of a bunch of relations is going to be the set of set of elements obtained by taking elements from each of the sets, each of the relations, and fusing them together. Okay. Okay, so here's our models. Okay, it's going to be, so I'm going to assume that there's only two kinds of non-logical symbols in the language. There's constants of type E cross E. Okay, so like kind of like names. Okay, and then there's going to be predicates of type, it's hard to say, S, and then the product of a bunch of entities followed by a state final thing. And then a product with that's both the first and second component. I'll give you examples of this in a second. Okay, so each constant C just gets mapped to a pair of positive and negative atomic entities. So this is going to be the denotation and anti-denotation of C, okay, where they have to be orthogonal counterparts of each other. Again, I'll give you examples in a moment. And then each predicate is going to be mapped to a pair of relations, the extension and anti-extension of P, where the extension is going to be a subset of it's going to be a set of ordered pairs where all of the components but the last one are entities, are positive entities, and the last component is a positive state, whereas the anti-extension is going to be a set of ordered pairs where each of the elements, components except for the last one, again are positive entities, but the last one is a negative state. Okay, so here are some examples of this. So like Alfonso, the positive valuation of Alfonso is just Alfonso. The negative evaluation is not Alfonso. So the orthogonal counterpart of Alfonso. Okay, an intransitive verb like sing, the positive extension is just going to be a set of ordered pairs where you have an individual and a state. And one way to think about this is the fact that this ordered pair is in sing means that S is a truth maker for Alfonso sings. This is after a little bit of composition. Okay, and then T is a truth maker for Claribel sings. Okay, the fact that this state is in here is that S is a false maker for Alfonso doesn't sing. Okay, sorry, S is a false maker for Alfonso sings in this case. Okay, and then transitive verbs like love get these triples. I assume that they combine with their direct object before their subject. So the fact that this triple is in the positive extension of love means that U is a truth maker for Alfonso loves Claribel. Okay, that's how this is going to work in the system. Let me just say a few notes about this. So yeah, this valuation function determines the truth makers and false makers for atomic sentences, just like in sentential TMS, after just a little bit of functional application. Okay, I don't impose any official constraints on predicate extensions and anti-extensions, though you could do this in a modalized state space, like you could do no truth value Glutz gaps conditions. Okay, just like before. Okay, here's one thing that's important to keep in mind. So I require truth makers to be positive states, but false makers are always going to be negative states. Okay, though on the other hand, only positive entities enter into predicate extensions and anti-extensions. Okay. And this decision to make false makers be negative states is really largely to lend a nice foundational symmetry to the theory, where denotation and anti-denotation goes together with positive and negative entities, and verification and falsification goes with positive and negative states. It's a little different than I think how Fine thinks about it, because, for example, like I think he would think that like Claribel's wearing a blue dress, for example, like a false maker for that would be Claribel wearing a red dress. But in my system, that wouldn't actually be an official exact false maker. The exact false makers would be Claribel not wearing a red dress, or the fusion of her not wearing particular red dresses. Okay, that said, I can still respect the intuition that Claribel wearing, so I think I might have gotten my colors mixed up, but I can still respect the intuition that the state of Claribel wearing a blue dress is a false, like sort of makes false in some sense the sentence that Claribel's wearing a red dress, because it would still count as what's called a loose false maker on my theory. Anyways, this is kind of a little bit into the weeds of truth making. If anyone wants to talk about this in the Q&A question period or whatever, I'm more than happy to. Okay, so that's the background. Let's actually start doing some semantics now and start composing things together. Okay, so here's some foothills. Okay, so the way that semantics is going to work, it's going to lift this bilateral assignment of denotations and anti-denotations to constants and extensions and anti-extensions to predicates to positive and negative interpretations for all expressions in the language. Okay, I'm going to start off with just a simple fragment with names and transitive and intransitive verbs and build up from there. Okay, so the central type in the system is going to be the polymorphic type of bilateral menus. Okay, so a menu type is going to be this MA. This is an abbreviation for something which is an ordered pair, where the first element is a set of things of type A, and the second component is a set of things of type A as well. Okay, so this is going to be like the central type in Truthmaker semantics. It really is like a menu semantics. Okay. So, so first of all, names. So names are evaluated as E cross E type in the models, but they can be lifted into menu types using a type shifter. This one below. This is, for those of you who are familiar with the set monad, this is our return, okay? And so essentially just what it does is it takes the values and wraps them in a set. So just look at the example, that's I think easier. So Alfonso, the positive interpretation of Alfonso is just Alfonso, and the negative interpretation is not Alfonso. Okay, but after you lift it, the positive interpretation is the singleton set containing Alfonso, and the negative interpretation is the singleton set containing not Alfonso, which is menu type ME. Okay, so the menu type applied to entities. Okay, predicates are already menu types in PT2 models, though the full interpretation just does this one complication where I close the valuations, the extensions and anti-extensions supplied by model under mirror logical closure. Okay, so this is sort of follows a proposal by Link in the 80s and a lot of other work in plurality. Okay, so for example, so the interpretation of sing is going to be, the positive interpretation is going to be the extension from the model, but then the closure of it. So before we had like Alfonso S, Clarabelle T, but now we would also add this, for example. So like Alfonso and Clarabelle and then S and T. Okay, here's the, here's the formal definition of how you do this closure. Okay, and then just a few more things before we actually start putting this to work. So it's a relational system, but I still want to have functional application. So I'm going to borrow this nice technique from Mooskins and work with what are called slice functions. Okay, here's the definition, but let me just tell you how it works with the example. So, so the first slice function for sing, for example, would be a function which takes in entities, right? Because entities are the type of the first element in these in the first component, pardon me, in these tuples, which are the elements of sing. Okay, and then it would spit out, if you put in like Alfonso, it would spit out S, okay, and maybe other states, if Alfonso can occur with other states in here. If you put in Clarabelle, it would spit out T. If you put in Alfonso and Clarabelle, it would spit out the fusion of S and T, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me pause. Does that make sense, slice functions? You're taking a relation and you're turning it into a function on one of its components. Okay, great. Okay, and so once you have that, here's basic functional application, okay? So the way it works is, so assume that you have a expression of menu type M, and then the cross product from A1 to sort of the product from A1 to AN, and the positive and all you, so the positive, the expression the expression beta, its positive interpretation is of type A1. Okay, then the way function application works, I call this product functional application, so product FA. Okay, is going to be that the positive interpretation is going to be the interpretation of alpha, the positive interpretation of alpha sliced on its first component applied to the positive interpretation of beta. And then the negative interpretation is going to be the negative interpretation of alpha sliced on its first component applied also again to the positive interpretation of beta. Okay, so in particular, in the case where like alpha is say a verb, like an intransitive or transitive verb, and beta is a name, then essentially what this does is the positive interpretation of, say, Alfonso sings is going to apply Alfonso to the positive interpretation of sing, sliced. Okay, whereas the negative interpretation is going to apply Alfonso again to the negative interpretation of sing. Okay, so one thing to note about this is that the anti-denotation of beta, right? So so like say Alfonso it doesn't actually directly come into play in this principle, right? So it's really just coming along with us until we find cases, when we reach cases later in the talk, where we have NPs with negative individuals in them, okay? So here are some examples to see how this works. So the positive interpretation of Alfonso saying, it ends up giving you the set of states where Alfonso combined with that state are in the positive interpretation of sing. So truthmakers for Alfonso sings, okay, this is the desired result. Whereas the negative interpretation of Alfonso saying is again going to give you a set of states, and these are going to be the false makers for Alfonso singing. Okay, and so the type of Alfonso saying is just MS, the menu type applied to to states, which is just like in standard sentential truthmaker semantics. So you recover the standard theory in this. Okay, I see that there's a question. So Ricardo is asking, yeah, that makes sense. So Alfonso sings isn't falsified by the state for not Alfonso sings, it's falsified for the state for Alfonso doesn't sing. Yeah, that's basically right, the right sort of idea. Although, as we'll see, the sort of not Alfonso, more to say about this in a moment when we get to NPs with negative components to it. Okay, so let's now start like doing the Boolean connectives and see how those work. Okay, so negation is actually negation has been the thorn in many a semantic theory, but here it's just really simple. I mean, because we have this bilateral framework. So just as in, so in compositional TMS, we can just treat negation as a cross-categorial operator for talking between positive and negative interpretations. And this is really just generalizing the treatment in the standard sentential truthmaker semantics, where it toggles between truthmakers and false makers. Okay, and I should say an assumption I'm making throughout the talk is that Boolean connectives operate on menu type expressions. Okay, so sometimes you have to do that lift operation, or you have to just always convert things to menu type before you can apply Boolean operations to them. And so so as long as alpha is a menu type, then the negation of it just flips the interpretations. Okay, so here's an example of Alfonso didn't dance, how that works. And in fact, actually, you get the two parsings where the negation takes scope over Alfonso dance, or the one where negation first applies just to the verb, and then you apply it to Alfonso. They both actually deliver the exact same result here, okay? Okay, just a few points about negation. So negation is really simple, but it's only amenable to the simple treatment because we've shifted the heavy lifting to the negative lexical entries for other expressions. So it's really, for every expression, we have to give it both a positive and negative interpretation. I actually think that this is, sometimes this is taken as a negative aspect of truthmaker semantics, but I actually think it's a virtue of it. I think Kit has come to think this as well, despite some things he said in his earlier work. And but yeah, again, this is the reason why negation is simple, because the complication gets shifted to other parts of the system. Other thing to note, we don't need separate entries for sentential and VP negation. So this is, I think, just a nice thing, which is a slight advantage over a recent system by some linguists, the inquisitive semanticists, they have a paper called Composing Alternatives, where they really need two negations in there. Okay, and now that I allow negation to operate on expressions of all menu types, the distribution of negation in English is highly contentious, right? So there's a lot of linguists, for example, who think that you can't negate entity type referring expressions. And I'm actually going to suggest later on that you can, okay, at least because I think that quantifiers are ME type expressions. Okay, so more on that later. Okay, so that's negation. Here's coordination. This sort of delivers on those early motivations for the talk that I started with. Okay, so conjunction is just on the positive side is just fusion. On the negative side is just union. Okay, and disjunction on the positive side is union, and on the negative side is fusion. Okay, and this gives you just nice results across all different syntactic categories. I'll just crash through these examples. So sentential conjunction, you just recover standard truthmaker semantics. Okay. Okay, so for example, Alfonso sang and Clarabelle danced. The positive interpretation is going to be a fusion of a truthmaker for Alfonso sang and a truthmaker S prime for Clarabelle danced. A false maker for Alfonso sang and Clarabelle danced is going to be either a false maker for Alfonso sang or a false maker for Clarabelle danced. okay, just like in the standard theory. But you can also conjoin VPs. So sing and dance, this is going to be the notation there. I won't go through that carefully. And then NP conjunction is just going to be like what the linguists have been doing, at least in one tradition, following the work by Link. Okay, so Alfonso and Clarabelle, on the positive side, you're going to get sorry, on this part, remember, because the Boolean connectives always operate on menu types, you first have to lift the names, right, using return. And so you end up with the positive interpretation is going to be the singleton containing Alfonso fused with Clarabelle. And then the negative interpretation is actually the new thing. I've actually never seen this just formally implemented before, even though Kit suggested in that 2017 paper. So the negative interpretation is going to be a set containing not Alfonso and not Clarabelle. Okay, and then similarly, you get like the same kind of things with sentential disjunction, VP disjunction, and NP disjunction. You get alternative semantics coming out here. Okay, here's what I think is the coolest technical part of the whole system. This worked out a lot nicer than I thought it would. So there's kind of a bit of a puzzle. So remember how functional application works, right? It takes a so if you have an, let me put the puzzle this way. So if, let's say you have an NP conjunction like Alfonso or Clarabelle, the positive interpretation of that is a set of entities, okay? But let's say you wanted to compose that with like an intransitive verb like sing, right? You can't use the functional application rule I had before because this isn't of the right type, right? It would only work if it was like an individual, not a set of individuals. Okay, so the way that this is can be done nicely is that, at least on the positive side, you can use something called bind, which is a method of composition from the set monad. Okay, and this has really been brought into linguistics pretty recently by work by Simon Charlo. Okay, so on the positive side, this is just really kind of a relational version of bind. Okay, and so how does it work? So if you have an expression whose positive interpretation is of type SA1, okay, and then you have another expression beta, which is of menu type M, and then the product of A1 up through AN. Okay, then the way you can compose these on the positive side is that, so you take the interpretation of alpha, the positive interpretation of alpha, that's going to be a set of things, okay? And then you take each one, so like let's say it's a set containing Alfonso and Clarabelle, for example. So you would take like Alfonso, and then you would just do like functional application applied to the positive interpretation of beta. And then you would get a set of states out of that, just like before. And then you would also do that with Clarabelle, you get another set of states, and then you would just union them together, okay? So that's how bind works on the positive side. That's not new, okay? What is new is the negative part of it. And so this is like, and so how does this work on the negative side? So on the negative side, what you just want to do is, so again, you have the set containing Alfonso and Clarabelle. Now what you do is you take Alfonso, you apply to the negative interpretation of, say, sing or whatever, and you get states of false makers for Alfonso singing. You also do that with Clarabelle. And now instead of unioning them, you actually want to fuse them together. And then, because that'll give you the right false makers for a sentence like Alfonso or Clarabelle sang. Okay, I'll show you some examples to show that this really gives you nice results. But this is one of my two favorite parts of the entire system, is really just the negative, the dark half of bind. Okay, dark bind. Okay, and I should say, in this special case where the positive interpretation of alpha is just a singleton set, this essentially reduces down to just functional application, right? So you can think about like bind as just like a generalization of functional application that allows you to combine predicates to expressions that denote sets of entities rather than just an entity. Okay, so here are two compositions. I won't go through the details. I'll just sort of just talk about the results. So if you have a sentence like Alfonso or Clarabelle sang or danced, and you apply binds to it, you're going to end up with a set of states where it's the union of, well, it's going to be a union of, the set of states are going to be either a truthmaker for Alfonso sang, or a truthmaker for Alfonso danced, or a truthmaker for Clarabelle sang, or a truthmaker for Clarabelle danced. I take it that's the intuitively correct result. And then if you take the negative side, so Alfonso or Clarabelle sang or danced, you're going to end up with a fusion of four states, right? Where the first one is a false maker for Alfonso singing, the second one is a false maker for Alfonso dancing, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you get nice results here. Okay, so far so good. Any questions on this stuff? No? Okay, so let me talk to you a little bit about cumulativity and distributivity. Okay, so so one thing that linguists have noticed for a long time, but I think philosophical logicians maybe have not, is that sentences with just conjunctions in them have like a variety of different readings. Okay, so and well, just conjunctions or certain kinds of quantified expressions. So consider this famous sentence. This was introduced by Shaw in a famous paper from the 80s. So 600 Dutch firms use 5,000 American computers. Okay, this has actually at least 3 different readings, right? So one reading is called the cumulative reading, where there's 600 Dutch firms and 5,000 American computers, such that each firm uses at least one of the computers, and each computer is used by at least one of the firms. This is also sometimes called like the cross-product reading, okay? It also has a distributive reading, where you have like 600 Dutch firms each used 5,000 American computers. And then finally, it has what's called a collective reading. So like some group or like coalition of 600 Dutch firms collectively used a group of 5,000 American computers. Okay, so I'm not going to talk much about collective readings today, even though I think that you can handle them just pretty nicely in my system. I'm going to focus more on distributive readings because they're really important. And right now, I can't recover them. Okay, so I'll show that. The basic reading that you get in my system is the cumulative reading. And to get the distributive reading, you have to add some further bells and whistles. I should say what's going to follow is really in conformity with sort of the dominant approach right now in theoretical and experimental linguistics. Okay, and so the basic moves here aren't really new, except for the fact that they're being implemented. The bilateral versions of them are what's new. Okay, so so here's just an example which brings out the fact that I don't get the distributive readings. So consider a sentence like Alfonso and Clarabelle sang and danced. Okay, if you apply the stuff that I've been developing so far, you end up with the result that the truthmakers, the interpretation of this, the positive interpretation, is going to be a set of states where each state is a fusion. Sorry, it's going to be either a fusion of Alfonso singing, a state of Alfonso singing, and a state of Clarabelle dancing, or a fusion of Alfonso dancing and Clarabelle singing. Okay, and I think that is one reading of the sentence, right? That's the reading, the cumulative reading, where like Alfonso and Clarabelle between them sang and danced. Okay, but there's also a distributive reading where Alfonso and Clarabelle each sang and danced, right? Each of them sang and danced. Okay, and you want to be able to recover that as well. Okay, and the way I'm going to do that is, again, this is just following like a lot of work in linguistics, is that I'm going to assume that the distributive reading is recovered by a covert distributivity operator in the syntax. Okay, so this is following a proposal by Link, Craig Roberts, Roger Schwarzschild, and Lucas Champollion has done quite a lot of work on this. He's a linguist at NYU. Okay, so this is an adaptation of Link's original atomic D operator, and this does the job for the purposes of this talk. Though I think you ultimately will need something more complicated to deal with just the full range of distributivity phenomena in English or just in natural language. Okay, here's how it works. This distributivity operator, here's just the simple case where it operates on an intransitive verb. It's easily generalized. So it takes in a verb, okay, and it returns a new sort of predicate interpretation, right? So a new thing, a set of these entity state tuples, but now where the state component here is going to be the fusion of, you take your entity, you look at all the atoms inside of it, okay? Sorry. So it's going to be a new set of entity state pairs where the state is going to be a fusion of states. It's going to be a fusion of truthmakers where every atom in E, it's going to be a state where an atom in E satisfies the positive interpretation of alpha. And you just fuse that together for all the atoms, okay? And then you get sort of a new predicate. Okay, and then that is kind of just like Link implemented in Truthmaker semantics. Okay, and that's kind of new, but not that interesting because it's really just Link's idea. The negative side is really cool how well that actually works out. So on the negative side, you can do a similar thing, but you get, so you take a predicate, you take a predicate and you get a new like predicate interpretation, a new set of these entity state pairs, but now the state is going to be the union. Now you take all the atoms in E, you apply the negative interpretation to it, and it's going to be a state which is in the union of the result of that. And so let me just show you how this works. So now remember that original sentence, Alfonso and Clarabelle sang and danced, right? I can only get the cumulative reading, but now if I apply the distributive operator to sang and danced, I get the desired result. So I won't go through all the details. You can sort of check this on your own. It's actually quite fun to work in the system once you get used to it, to do these derivations. I don't know, I just find it, I don't know, in the same way maybe you like doing Fitch proofs or something. It's just like, you know, you can spend many happy days doing this. And anyways, you get the results that it's now, a truthmaker is going to be a fusion of 4 states: a state of Alfonso singing, a state of Alfonso dancing, a state of Clarabelle singing, and a state of Clarabelle dancing. Okay, so you get the distributive reading. Some really interesting stuff starts to happen on the negative side. And here I think this is one of these places where like the benefits of the system start to really make themselves clear. Okay, so consider, first of all, Alfonso and Clarabelle sang and danced without the distributive operator. Okay, the negative interpretation of that is going to be a set containing of false makers, where each false maker is either a false maker for Alfonso and Clarabelle both not singing, okay? Or, so it's either going to sort of be a state of Alfonso and Clarabelle both not singing, or a state of Alfonso and Clarabelle both not dancing. Okay, but then if you insert the distributive operator, then you kind of get the result where the negative interpretation of Alfonso and Clarabelle sang and danced is going to be a state of Alfonso not singing, or Alfonso not dancing, or Clarabelle not singing, or Clarabelle not dancing. So you actually get 2 different, the semantics predicts that the sentence is actually ambiguous on the negative side, which I think is the right result. Okay. Something very, very nice about the system is that you sort of get homogeneity for free. This is sort of baked into the very fabric of the bilateral semantics. So let me tell you a little bit about what this is. So I'll sort of try to bring it out in a simpler example. Okay, so consider the sentence Alfonso and Clarabelle sang. So on the positive side, that's actually whether you insert the distributivity operator or not, it gives you the same result, and that's kind of what you would expect, right? So the sentence is unambiguous on the positive side. But notice what it gives you on the negative side. So if you have Alfonso and Clarabelle sang and you don't insert the distributive operator, you end up with the states of Alfonso and Clarabelle both not singing, essentially. That's what this is. Okay, whereas if you insert the distributive operator, you end up with the set of states where it's a state of Alfonso not singing, or a state of Clarabelle not singing. And actually, there's been a lot of work that's been showing that like conjunctions actually do have these kind of homogeneity effects. And it's actually, this stuff becomes, I should say, homogeneity is actually even clearer when you think about definite plurals, okay, versus like universally quantified statements. So consider a sentence like the windows are open, okay? So intuitively, at least, the truth that's going to be true if all the windows are open. But what about when would it be false, right? The windows are open. And I think a lot of people have the intuition that that's going to be false if all the windows are actually not open, right? All the windows are closed. And so this is kind of just like that happening at the level of conjunctive NPs rather than definite plurals. But I think it's like kind of the same thing going on. And so, and then notice the other interesting thing, which is that homogeneity, this kind of homogeneity effect, disappears in the presence of a distributivity operator. And so I'm going to propose later on, actually, and this is, again, this is, a lot of linguists have thought this as well, that universally quantified statements have a distributivity operator. And that's why, for example, if you say every window is open, right, that's going to be true if all the windows are open, but it's going to be false if at least there you don't have homogeneity. So it's going to be false if only one of the windows is closed. You don't need them all to be closed. Okay. So anyways, there's a lot to be said about homogeneity. There's a lot of linguists working on this, but I just want to note that this just falls out of the system for free. Okay. I've already gone for an hour. I kind of want to at least do the mixed polarity stuff, and then I'll just crash through the quantifiers. Yeah. And then, yeah, Sean, just cut me up. Can you just tell me when I have like 5 minutes left, and then I'll start to panic and just fly through the rest of the slides. But I figured I'd rather just kind of go over this slowly and get to what I can, rather than, because the devil's really in the details for all this stuff, and rather than just forcing it through. So far, actually, like the anti-denotation stuff, the negative individuals, they haven't really played much of a role, because remember, both the product bind and the product FA rules, they only really worked with a positive interpretation of their subject argument. Okay, so I now want to turn to expressions like Alfonso but not Clarabelle, where the anti-denotation stuff comes in. This is where it gets kind of interesting. Well, maybe, hopefully you already find it. This is where it gets more interesting anyways. Okay, so So how does Alfonso but not Clarabelle work in the system? Well, on the positive side, that's going to denote the singleton set containing the fusion of Alfonso and not Clarabelle. Okay. On the negative side, it gives you it denotes a set of things, right? It denotes not Alfonso, and it also denotes Clarabelle. Okay. So one problem is like, well, now that we have these, so look on the positive side now, we have not Clarabelle in here. So we need that to compose now with like predicates, like verbs and whatnot, or adjectives. And the problem is though, if you just flat-footedly apply product FA or product bind, the system collapses because if you remember the way I built my models, predicate extensions and anti-extensions only have positive individuals in there, but there's sort of like deeper foundational reasons for that, which I can talk about if you want. Oh, okay, in a minute, I have 5 minutes. Okay, so, you need to do something to deal with these. And basically the move I'm gonna make is that I'm gonna refine this distributed. I'm gonna assume that these always require a covert distributivity operator in the that heads the predicate that they combine with. Okay, and then that can be adjusted to handle the negative individuals. There's some evidence for this, but I'm not going to be able to go through it. I'm not going to be able to go through the refined distributivity operator. But the basic idea, let me just show you an example to give you a feel for how this works. Okay, so just consider like Alfonso but not Clarabelle saying. Okay, what that ends up doing is that you end up applying Alfonso and not Clarabelle to sing with the distributive operator in front of it. Okay, and what that does is it essentially, it looks at the positive thing, so like Alfonso, and it applies it to positive sing. And then it looks at the negative thing, like not Clarabelle, and it knows it's negative, and the distributive operator then applies it to the negative version of the negative interpretation of sing. And so you end up with the desired result. So you end up with a fusion of states where it's the fusion of Alfonso singing and Clarabelle not singing. Okay, and you get the right results on the negative side as well. Okay, let me just really crash through quantifiers here. As expected, I'm just going to treat universal and existential quantification as a generalization of conjunction and disjunction. But notice this has a really interesting consequence. So in Montague's famous papers like PTQ, he assigns both names and quantificational DPs the type, this really complicated high type of generalized quantifiers, essentially property sets of properties. Whereas I'm going to do things the other way around and actually bring quantificational DPs down to the same type as names. So in the system, you can actually just treat quantifiers as ME type denotations. Okay, so quantifiers are just kind of like, they just function kind of like names, at least after names are lifted, at least. Okay, so here's how like everything and something would work. So everything on the positive side would just give you the sum, the fusion of all the atomic individuals. And on the negative side, it would give you the set of all the negative individuals, okay, not fused together, okay? And something would give you on the positive side, the set of atomic individuals, and on the negative side, the fusion of the negative ones. So for example, let's say we have these magicians or whatever in our thing. So everything on the positive side would be the singleton containing Houdini fused with Presto, fused with, I don't know, well, it doesn't have to be just magicians, fused with my chair, fused with my coffee cup. And on the negative side would be the set containing not Houdini, not Presto, and so on. Okay, something on the positive side would be the set containing Houdini, Presto, my chair, my coffee cup, this computer. And on the negative side would be the singleton set containing the fusion of all the negative individuals. Okay, you have to do something a little bit fancy here because everything doesn't deliver homogeneity effects. I assume that everything and something always require a distributivity operator as well in their nuclear scope. Again, this is sort of also being proposed by a lot of linguists like Brasiviano in this 2013 paper. And then once you do that, you just get all the sort of the results that you expect. So everything vanished, you get sort of the fusion of states where in each state, one of the positive individuals vanished. It's a truth maker for one of the positive individuals vanishing. Everything vanished on the negative side gives you sort of the set of a false maker for one of the, like any false maker for an individual vanishing is going to be a false maker for everything vanished, and you get the right results for something vanished and something on both the positive and negative side. Some fun facts about this: everything and something are duals. I showed that on the handout, not on the slides. You can get a really nice treatment of singular versus plural DPs in this framework. So like some things now, instead of just being, for example, on the positive side, instead of just being the set of atomic individuals, it would now be the set of both atomic individuals and fusions of them, right? So like all the things that could be something, right, in a plural sense. Okay, this I think is a interesting feature of the system, is that, so a lot of linguists have proposed that nothing can be treated as not something, but we're like not as a sentential negation operator, where something is living inside of its scope. But actually, if you can actually do that in the system and you get good results, but you can actually do something more interesting in that you can treat nothing as just not something, as like an ME type quantifier. Okay, so in particular, nothing would just be on the positive side would be the fusion of all the negative individuals, and on the positive side would be just the set of positive individuals. Okay, and then it composes nicely. I think I have an example on the handout. You get all the right results. So like nothing is just not something. You don't have to think. The negation actually just negates the something, the quantified DP. It doesn't negate, it's not a sentential negation. Okay, there's things you have to do to deal with relativized quantifiers. Fine suggests bringing in these totality facts. Never really been a fan of those. And so I do something based on work by von Fintel, and that I just assume that quantifiers have this state argument, which provides all the relativity you need. I don't have time to go through the details, but as far as I can tell, it works out nicely. You can sort of do relativized quantifiers. So you can treat sentences like every magician vanished, and you get sort of the right results for all of those things. Okay, and let me just very quickly tell you about these sort of the pot of gold now at the end. So this is a passage from a journal semantics paper by Lucas Champollion. So he goes, this is at the very end of the paper, after he's been arguing. This is a paper where Lucas argues for a intersective, just ordinary Boolean account of conjunction rather than conjunction as fusion. So like he argues for like conjunction as set intersection rather than fusion. And he goes, the hardest nut to crack for anyone wishing to pursue the collective theory is probably coordination of non-upward entailing quantifiers such as John and nobody else, or John and an odd number of women. Not only do Haycock and Zamparelli, this is sort of another famous paper on conjunction, not give a satisfying account of these conjunctions, it also does not seem easy to give one under any approach that takes the basic meaning of and to be collective, this is fusion. For this reason alone, it seems preferable to make the intersective theory work if one is interested in using generalized quantifier denotations for at least some non-upward entailing noun phrases. Okay, so I want to leave you by just cracking these subnuts on Lucas's paper, right? So the first one was John and nobody else. Well, I mean, here's how you can treat it in compositional TMS. So John is just going to be, well, we've talked about that already. Well, let me just jump to the main. Okay, so John and nobody else. On the positive side, that would be the singleton set containing positive John, and then like not Marge and not Peter and not everyone else other than John. And on the negative side, it would be the set containing not John and the set containing Marge, the set containing Peter. And then that just composes very nicely with whatever predicate you want to apply to it. So John and nobody else saying on the positive side is going to give you exactly what you would want. So it's going to deliver a set of, a truth maker for this is going to be a fusion of a set of states where John sang and Mary didn't sing and Peter didn't sing and everyone else didn't sing, okay? And then the second subnut is a little bit more complicated. This was this example of John and an odd number of women. But again, once you have these negative individuals around, you can just treat an odd number as kind of one of these mixed polarity expressions. So let's say that you had 3 women in your domain. Okay, woman number 1, woman number 2, and woman number 3. Then an odd number of women, just on the positive side here, would be a set of fusions, where the first one would be like woman 1, and then fused with not woman 2 and not woman 3. Okay, the second one would be woman 2 fused with not woman 1 and not woman 3, and so on and so forth. It's like all the ways that you can get an odd number of women, right? And then John and an odd number of women, you would just like tag John on to each of those different fusions, and then it composes nicely as well. So John and an odd number of women saying, that gives you, if you just work it through the system, it gives you exactly the right truth makers for this. It would give you a set, if you only have the 3 women, right, it would be a set of fusions of 4 states where let's say one example would be where S1 is the state of John singing, and S2 is a state of the woman 1 singing, and S3 is a state of woman 2 not singing, and S4 is a state of woman 3 not singing. And then you would have to do that for all the different combinations of the odd number of women. Okay, but anyways, so you get like just really nice, very easy ways of dealing with these problem cases that Champollion was bringing about in his 2015 paper. Okay, anyways, so that's what I got for you. There's still quite a lot of work to do, like to deal with abstraction and give a full treatment of quantifiers like inverse scope. How does that work? This collective stuff, I haven't really told you how that works. What else? Oh, I think one thing that's pretty cool is, so like, so in Steve Yablo's book, there's, and in some recent papers, he talks a lot about but as like an acceptive, right? So like all the justices but Clarence Thomas raise their hand, right? Where intuitively what you're taking all the justices and you're taking Clarence Thomas out of that, and then you're applying raising the hand to that. And I think you can give a nice treatment of acceptives in Truthmaker semantics, and probably if there are cross-categorial cases of this, you can probably deal with it quite nicely as well. And then just one foundational thing that I need to think more about is, so I was talking about, there's this work by Viola Schmidt that's kind of making a big splash right now in linguistics, where on conjunction, and she's been arguing that you really need pluralities in all the different domains based on various kinds of cumulativity data. And I sort of need to work through her papers more carefully and see whether you really need all that, because on my system, you don't have it, right? You only have sums in the entity and state spaces, and all the fusions in the other domains are like just induced from fusion in they're just sort of like lifted from the fusion, the mereological stuff and the ground level structures. And so anyways, I don't know, I need to think about whether I can handle that data. If not, the system probably doesn't work at the end of the day, or needs to be made more complicated. All right, thanks so much for this. It's really great. This is the first time I presented this stuff, and it's again, this is like my favorite thing I've ever worked on. So it was great to share it with you.